Maybe there's something about the fact that I was raised in a small town in the southwestern part of Wisconsin that informs the story I'm about to tell. Maybe it was the fact that I was strikingly confirmed Lutheran, or it could have been the fact that I read Luther's catechism and didn't really understand much of it many years ago. Or maybe it was the fact that I read about 6 years ago Max Weber's famous treatise, The Protestant Ethic in the Spirit of Capitalism, and that particular essay really blew me away. For it was around that time that I was beginning to formulate a series of ideas in connection with what Joseph Pieper called total work, the view according to which work has slowly taken over the nature of the world. I'll include a TEDx talk in which I talk a little bit about this matter. But here I want to discuss with you this marvelous text by Brad Gregory called Rebel in the Ranks. Subtitle, Martin Luther, the Reformation, and the Conflicts that Continue to Shape Our World. Gregory has also written a book, an academic tome, released about 6 years before this, called The Unintended Reformation, and both of those books make very, very similar arguments. It's an interesting argument, a fascinating one, and his view is that the Protestant Reformation inadvertently and unintentionally gave rise to fundamental elements that are now a part of the modern world in which you and I live. How did it happen? By Gregory's lights. It's a very strange story. In the first place, Martin Luther and then other reformers around him begin to critique the Catholic Church on the grounds of corruption. But that's not the primary critique. It's not just a critique of the falling away of Christian behavior or practice. Rather, it's a critique, and this was perhaps rather novel, it's implied, of Christian doctrine. In essence, Luther begins to set out his own theology, which is going to be based on Scripture alone, on a close examination of the meaning of Scripture. And he thinks that the Scripture, by his lights, deviates in pretty fundamental respects from the Catholic doctrine that he had been steeped in. What initially seems like a critique of Catholicism yields a drastic result, namely the breaking apart of this new Lutheranism from the universal Catholic Church. That's not the end of the story, though. As Gregory tells it, the problem is that reformers cannot agree with Catholic religious people, nor can they agree among themselves. The very standard of Scripture alone gives rise rather to a series of epistemic conflicts about how to interpret Scripture and about what role it's going to play in the lives of good Christians. So in lieu of consolidating a shared understanding, we see rather hyper-fragmentation, as Gregory puts it in his earlier book, The Unintended Reformation. That's not all, though, because in addition to a disagreement about doctrine, there was an idea about the role that religion should play in the life well led. Gregory tries to bring this out by calling it more than religion. I might call this religion as a way of life. Religion was supposed to supply, as sociologist Peter Berger put it, a sacred canopy that would make sense of the totality of the lives of Christians, ranging, of course, from the doctrinal all the way down to the granularly practical. Religion was not just meant to inform the life a Christian led, it was meant to transform such a life. And therefore, you should see every single aspect of life touch deeply at least in theory, if not also in practice, by the Christian faith. But if that more than religion view holds sway, then the question is who's right and who's wrong? What ensued was extremely bloody. Conflicts, persecutions, warfare, the 30 Years' War, the Glorious Revolution, and so on, until we meet, says Gregory, something novel in nature, and that is the birth of the Dutch Republic. For the Dutch Republic began to engage in a certain kind of innovation, we might say, and that was a conceptual innovation. Religious toleration was granted, with the result that different people of faith moved into this new Dutch Republic, particularly Amsterdam, and began something else that was quite novel. That is dulce commerce, sweet commerce, as Albert Hirschman puts it in his famous little treatise called The Passions and the Interests. I'm going to get around to that, but the key here is twofold. First, we're introduced to a Dutch Republic that begins to secularize religiosity. And that's the point I'm going to bring out shortly. Second, that secularization cannot be prized apart from this new idea of the goods life, not the good life, but the goods life, as Gregory wants to call it. These ideas from the Dutch Republic, together with Enlightenment philosophy and deism and so forth, get carried into the new United States, where they become enshrined in our most fundamental documents. Now, I said that I was going to try to draw out secularization and the goods life, or consumer capitalism. Let me do that now. What does Gregory mean then by secularization? Remember that concept he offered as a neologism, more than religion. I found it easier to speak in terms of the late Pierre Hadot, who spoke of philosophy as a way of life. So we can speak analogously of religion as a way of life. So the first thing we notice with regard to the process of secularization, as told by Gregory, is that the nature and the scope of religion are both narrowed. No longer is religion more than religion. Now it will become an individual choice, a matter of conscience, something that informs certain domains of your life, private domains by and large, but not other domains, as we will get to. So we see a compartmentalization, a fragmentation, and a limitation of religiosity. And that will make it possible for various and sundry people to engage in different sorts of religious practices, but by and large, privately. Secondly, religion becomes à la carte, becomes one option among many others. This is a reference to Charles Taylor's work, A Secular Age. What I mean is that at this point in time, we're looking at the 19th and 20th centuries now in the United States, just to be sure that you know where I'm at in this story, in this history. Religion starts to become something that one chooses in an array of other options. Obviously, on the side of Protestantism, you see more and more denominations started in the United States, more than can be named in a single short talk like this. So you start to see religion as, what I said, a la carte. That is, you could go here, you could go here, you could go here, you could be Presbyterian, you could be Episcopalian, you could be a Mennonite, you could be a Quaker, you could be a traditional Catholic, you could be perhaps Eastern Orthodox, or you could become Reformed or Orthodox Jewish. and on it goes. But that also means that you can be free not to be religious at all. And that development, which goes beyond the scope of this particular talk, is precisely what we're seeing playing out in many quarters throughout the United States. Many people are religious, or I'm sorry, spiritual but not religious, and others would simply say that they are agnostic or that they are full-blown atheist, a term I will come to more in other talks. So now we've covered just a little bit of the strongly narrowing scope of religion, together with the attenuated meaning of religion. And we've begun to see religion as being something that exists as a series of options available to us, as if we were going to a cafeteria and looking about and seeing what we're going to order, so to say. The third feature that Gregory points out in his book Rebel in the Ranks is that religion, normatively speaking, should have no or very little influence on public life. Obviously, there's a church-state separation referenced in our American documents. But what's also clear is that whatever it is that informs one's spirit or soul or inner life somehow should not be playing out in one's outer or public life. Now, that's not fully possible, but that is the conception that we have grown up with and that we've come to adopt and internalize. This then is our three-part conception of religion: narrow scope, narrow meaning, a la carte, and little influence on public and political life in principle. This all leaves room for what Gregory calls the goods life. I would call this a certain kind of Epicurean hedonism. In fact, I think that pleasures range from the total work side, that is the production side, to the consumption side that Gregory wishes to talk about in his book. That is, he thinks, and he only implies as much, that once the solution to all this bloodshed, all this tumult, all this conflict came in the Dutch Republic and then later on in the United States, an unintended consequence is that it opened the door for a completely different conception of eudaimonia, that is the good life. The good life became the goods life. We can't agree upon our ideas. We don't have a shared understanding of the religious life in the 20th and then 21st centuries, but we do share a commitment to material welfare, to having good stuff, to embracing the comforts and conveniences of life. He didn't use the word, but this is a sort of bourgeois conception that begins to win out. That's one of the great, amazing unintended consequences of the Protestant Reformation. As he puts it quite nicely, the very reformers who cared so deeply about the power and breadth of religion would have been totally shocked by how history contingently and in view of a solution unfolded. There is a certain minor tragedy afoot here, because not only has secularization, so described, paved the way for greater and greater acts of consumption, it's also, I would argue, paved the way for a greater and greater sense, a palpable sense of nihilism. Because human beings just can't live for bread and products and status alone. Something deep within us longs for some notion, however fuzzy it may be, of transcendence, of something more. When my eldest sister died unexpectedly, the question arose in me, uh, is there more than this? Is there more than meets the eye? Is there more than sense experience? Is there more than intellectualizing or thinking or contemplating? Is there more, that is to say, than empiricism and rationalism? The answer is yes. But at this moment in time, to discover that answer will require a deep, shall we say, mystical inner turn. In order to explore these seemingly mysterious, but actually quite marvelous and clear interior landscapes